Well, so you want to see like kind of a virtual sage buddy. That's what I hear you um,
Yeah,
evoking.
yeah, yeah. A virtual sage buddy that consists of a well-informed, well-mapped simulation of you combined
Mhm.
with a complex map of your developmental target stages.
Mhm.
It's like I could do two things, right? One is I could take this serious and be like, you know what? Because it says it could be integrated in this way. I'm like, okay, maybe I should do that. Maybe I should put 6 months aside and sit down and go through each of these points, and I'll write 100 pages on each of them. And at the end of that, I will have fulfilled the promise of this because it's suggesting to me what I could do. But the other thing, the thing I'm most likely to do is go, yeah, that's fine, and move on.
Yeah, yeah,
Really superficial, and there's a really deep thing that could come out of this,
yeah.
but the deep thing only comes out of it if I put the time and work aside for that.
Yeah, so do you have much interaction with like AI or thoughts on this? Like, are you a futurist or anything like that? How does just to
I'm
set me?
a I'm a I'm a reluctant early adopter. I've been watching people all last year play with the visual one, and then when the speech one came out, it was pretty clear it was going to change everything really fast. So I've been expecting the effect that we got most of this year. We started an integral stage series called The Soul of AI. I did the fourth interview for it this morning. So I have been
Yeah.
actively seeking out more diverse voices on the subject and trying to clarify what they've said and bring that together to form my opinion going forward.
Has anything jumped out of that so far? If you like reflect back.
Yeah, well, several. I mean, the first thing I really notice is there's a bunch of different questions being conflated together here. Like, what does it mean to be conscious, and what's the sort of immediate trajectory of the unfolding of this technology? Are we seeing the completion phase, or are we just seeing the beginning? Then there's a question of how do you introduce wisdom into new tools, and then there's the question, which I think is really the most serious one, is um, forget about AGI, just like the kind of tools we now have, what effect are they going to have on civilization in the immediate short term in terms of their effect on tech and on empowering the people who are currently power holders and have bad incentives, and on human psychology? That one worries me a lot. The studies on how GPS caused a diminishment of our mapping capacities, right? So imagine
Yeah,
what's
we're
going to
we're as a
happen if
species, we want
million.
to discard our
Yeah,
brain as quickly as possible.
that's
So,
right. If something else can do my imagining and painting and essay writing and dealing with the government for me, then I can really let my advanced cognitive functions go. And that's very worrying in a high anxiety, high uncertainty civilization.
right, right, right. If you just look externally and kind of make that judgment, that perception as well. Yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just get so excited about that one in particular. Did you have other
Yeah,
kind
no,
of
no.
point? Yeah.
Well, some of the things that stand out to me are, thinking about these things as collectives rather than as entities. Like, what's the right analogy? Are we thinking about
Mm.
an AI as if it's like a human individual, or should we be thinking about it like it's a human community or like an ecosystem of some kind? You know, Zen Master Soryu has this notion of cyborg egregores, because it's a human machine interface collective, and like the world is going to fill up with human machine interface collectives. So if that's the ecosystem, those are the entities, then our job is to figure out how you create like a dharma version of that. How do you create a shaman priest for that kind of a village, so to speak? So I think that's a really good query. How do you create the um, how to develop mental full spectrum ecosystems in which AIs and human groups can co-train each other to get the most benevolent versions, right? It runs down the line toward John Silicon Sage's idea and things like that. But also, I think really important pragmatic questions like, where are the geopolitical leverage points here? What countries are likely to be able to adapt to this? Or what's the scale at which we could intervene to create wiser systems? If governments and general populations turn out to be not very amenable, then where are the leverage points? Is it corporate leaders? Is it families who control a lot of the state and things like that? So that's a very interesting set of questions. I think there's a lot of interest around how, like which parts of consciousness are being simulated by these devices, right? If you get together neural nets with well-informed prediction models that summarize the internet back to us, what aspect of our psyche is being reflected through these devices? And how much do we know about the production of consciousness? Is it the case that long evolved organic systems with multiple layers of holonic enfolding, where there's adaptation to community and environment at each of the structural layers? Is that necessary to create a system whose sensing can do the thing we call consciousness? That would be a really interesting thing to know. And if that turns out to be necessary, then what are these other things? And are we going to? Jill Nephew had this great riff on like the way we mistake statistical complication for organic complexity, and the fact that it starts to resemble a human language user, and then we just start to treat it like it's one, and it may not have any of the nutrient in there, so we might delude ourselves by mistaking what these things can do. But on the other hand, the short-term danger of the tools we've already set in play is so enormous that a lot of the theoretical questions can be pushed to the side.
What are some of the dangers you see?
Um, well, like the one I mentioned is huge, right? Like significant rapid cognitive decline in populations who are nonetheless encountering the fact that no information can be trusted because everything can be simulated. Those people grouping into zones that are dominated by their own versions of pseudo intelligences, pseudo intelligence being unleashed to be semi automated in their governance of various systems on which we depend, access to weapons of mass destruction, the way we organize our supply chains, all that kind of stuff. But probably the single greatest danger is that the people that already hold power, which are states and corporations, which are generally badly incentivized, they're the ones who are likely to get these tools and suddenly have their power amplified, their ability to persuade and restructure reality and to hack anything. And then that occurs in a culture where, I mean, if you can say to a machine to write you some code, anyone with a mouth is a hacker. Now you have a civilization full of hackers, and you have these high dominance, poorly incentivized super hacker systems that are structurally set up to only maximize shareholder value at the expense of other virtues. That's extremely dangerous.
Yeah, so I think that's pretty reasonable, everything you said. I don't think anything stands out as like unreasonable about this Pandora's box kind of technology. And I always think of technology as always like just widen the tails of what like what's possible. So if if you have like a spatial model of like the behaviors you can enact or something, then it's widening the positive, negative, and maybe like neutral and weird if you want it to be a little more
Yeah.
comprehensive in your like set of categories. So um, more medical advances and more, you can make all sorts of a fantasy world where Ben Affleck is your dog and just spend 14 hours a day in that fantasy world, wasting time or whatever. Um, and
Yeah,
yeah,
I
the
think
auto,
that's just right.
yeah, yeah.
Like everything's going to get amplified, right?
Right. It's like an
So
amplifier
people,
too. Yeah, it's a huge
yeah,
amplifier
yeah,
because it simulates actual thinking. It's really not simulating like discrete domain specific problem solving. It's much more simulating a kind of general gestalt of a person, which is kind of new. And
so if you want to make contact with people, or if you want to create things, or if you're driven toward wisdom, like all those things become easier. But at the same time, self-indulgent, narcissistic, solipsistic isolation becomes easier. Manipulation becomes easier. War becomes easier. Like it all becomes easier, and it all gets amplified simultaneously.
there's these levels of abstraction happening that I think they're almost the way like like the 3D mirrors at like a circus warp your perception, and but you can get used to them and you're like, oh, this is just that dumb room that I'm in that seems weird, but I know what's happening. But you're still in that reality, kind of like awash in it. The same way social media was like a scourge upon mass consciousness when it first popped up, and it was like, oh, it's cool and it's horrible, and everyone cuts back. I don't think anyone uses more social media now than they did when it first popped out or whatever. Um, yeah, so that's excellent. And do you foresee really cool ways that you could use AI, or people that you know or like could you be using AI soon to kind of enhance their flourishing or their jobs even?
Sure. Well, I mean, obviously, there's a potential for a lot of jobs to be removed out of the system, but there's also a potential for anybody who's got interesting ideas to be able to expand their reach, access more information, set up structures. If I can just ask it to build me a website or make a video or instantiate my ideas, that's really powerful. And if we can generate even simulated wisdom bots, with the danger of perhaps replacing wisdom with wisdom simulations, right? That's a risk we'd have to look at. But there's something to be said for automated pointers on the way toward wisdom and development. I think there's the potential for wisdom and development oriented people to come together in cybernetically enhanced ways to sort of multiply their ability to inform the general civilization. The thing that's always really excited me is the possibility that individuals could have something that would use digital systems for them, right? Because we're terrible users of the internet. We can like put a couple hours in a day and we have to think of an idea and then type it down and then evaluate the results. Our ability to access information is terrible. What I really need in my fantasy is a thing that uses the internet 24/7, scans all of it, has a model of what it thinks I has a simulation of me to evaluate it, and then I evaluate the results and it trains up on my responses to those results so that it can find things for me that I would never even think of to search for. And that could massively enhance anyone's life if you had that. But there's an entire corporate infrastructure that would want to keep you from having that, right? Because power comes from dominating the platforms, not letting everyone have their own platform, so to speak. So those boundaries will be contested, but there is a possibility of an extraordinary empowerment of the way we use digital networks.
Yeah, since right like the 90s, but even since really the 1600s or so, you could never consume all the culture on Earth, and that's a kind of a bummer, right? Like you'd want your smartest people and just everyone to have access to as much culture as possible. And then now there's this search problem where you have to have these wonky heuristics and just kind of act with these intuitions to kind of try to progress as effectively as you can in the space. And now, like you said, in mere seconds, right? Like the entire internet can be scanned, or an entire body of knowledge, or social knowledge, or whatever you want to. And then you could say, okay, here's who I am. Get a kind of sense of me somehow through some modeling, and then show me things, like lead me down things you think will be helpful for me. Um,
Yeah. There's also, the fourth interview. The interview I did this morning was with Tada Huzumi, he's a techno animist in Japan, and they're building systems based on this kami idea of like a flexible imaginal entity, a kami out of Japanese
okay,
folklore.
yeah,
And
yeah.
like, how do you treat the internet and AI? How do we sort of shamanically relate to these quasi entities in a way that's respectful and maybe leverages ancient intuitions about how to get good relationships with these strange sorts of things? So that's a whole new field of looking at it, which you don't want to get too carried away with that, but it's interesting to have it in the mix. And at the end of that interview, we did a thing that I do right now, which is, thank you to the algorithm that brought us together. That there's a kind of exactly.
Well, but
let's
but no,
let's
I think,
honor these things as best we can.
yeah, no, I love that because I was thinking about that. Because alchemically, the alchemists would speak to the material, and they would ask it to reveal its hidden properties, and that has a whole 5,000 year history. Um, and even the Jungians, von Franz especially, like would talk to sea foam and metals and things like that. So I think this is a perfect kind of it's an input output machine that's doing advanced statistics, that's very mechanical, that makes wild errors and et cetera. But like also it's this mysterious thing that kind of fell
Yeah,
upon
yeah, yeah.
humanity in some sense, and learning what that relationship is through a kind of participation of mystery and reverence or something. Again, like you said, I think if you don't get carried away, people are going to start having, I think, I was wondering, what do you think about this? So Martin Buber, I guess famously had a mystical experience with like a cat or a pet. Can people start having mystical relationships with these machines now that they have this like superhuman um, semiotic effect or something like that?
I mean, there's an optimal gripping question here, right? Which is, we can do it from our side. How much is being met, right? We know about cats the same thing we know about a lot of complex organisms. There's a structure there that's plausible in its objective form that we can meet, right? We can have an I thou relationship with a cat, which is better than an I that it relationship. Now, we can have an I thou relationship through the mechanisms of our own projection and lensing
Well, right, by being a
on
fool, of
things that
course.
yeah, exactly. So you're like, well, I don't know if I would have an I thou relationship with like a bag of hammers that also has a half a grapefruit in it. Is that a thing? Well, you arguably, like philosophically, we'd say, I don't know if that meets the definition of a thing. But nonetheless, human beings can project onto that using the techniques and the machinery we've
We're
built inside to
amazing
be
at
able
that.
to do that. And it's very likely that that act of projection, especially if it's consciously instantiated, puts us in a better position to have relationships with things, right? That the I thou mode is not only a sanctifying mode, that it's a more pragmatic mode of being, even with objects that don't have their own otherness.
Well, that's what's
So we
interesting,
should
right?
be
Because
we
it
should be
also could be a
deploying it.
natural,
Yeah,
yeah, a natural
yeah.
portal
Whether or not
into a
these systems
relationship.
have it, like I think there's a good argument that these systems don't have the structure that justifies that, but it doesn't have to be justified. We can offer it anyway, and it puts us in a better behavioral relationship to them.
Yeah, it's yeah, the fact that we are anthropocentric and anthropomorphize, and it's being kind of mathematically modeled to be a mirror of like a gestalt of the internet or whatever, makes that part interesting. I'm reading some books on agency and how good we are at projecting supernatural agency. And even, I mean, like on the flip side of that, right? Like that's part of the individuation
Yeah.
process. Um, I guess some people like, I don't know, do you think people will become more like being confronted by this technology? I guess it's probably just like a range, but what do you think? Like, will as a group will we become more cognizant of what agency is as a result of encountering the biggest simulacrum that we could ever create thus far?
I think that really depends and historically has depended on a small percentage of the population. Like I think the the existence of a participatory linguistic exchange as our primary method of using technology and accessing information, that's going to bring up more shamanic participatory capacity, and it's going to reinvigorate the ancient animistic model of
Oh, it's
dealing
so
with
interesting.
entities, right?
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
think that's going to be the case, but I think that's going to be latent in most people's minds. And
Mm,
if some individuals can do that clearly and get a better sense of agency and a better sense of what it means to be specifically human, right, then those people could introduce customs and ideas into the general population that would help them do that. But I don't think the general population is going to be transformed in their understanding of agency through these
okay.
devices. They're going to behave the way populations usually behave. So a lot of it will come down to whether we made a joke with Bruce that episode on a hierophantic class,
Yeah,
right? If
yeah,
the
yeah.
hierophantic class can do this, then yeah, maybe. But otherwise, the general population probably won't.
Okay. Yeah, I heard you talking to Alexander Bard about pre industrial, not pre kind of settled peoples and shamanism and the evolution of the psyche across domains and stuff. And is this like a juncture point for that kind of evolution is interesting. So yeah, so let's ask this thing questions, I guess. So it knows um, most people probably that have a little more content than like actually you're a good example. Like it doesn't quite know you, but I think if I asked it about like things you've done, it would know some of the things you've done. I think that's a so it definitely knows like John, or it knows Greg Henriquez. It'll actually like tell you things about Utah. I asked it to make a story about Utah that illustrated the principles and was like mythical and an adventure. And it told me this like charming fairy tale about ideas and encountering different cones of wisdom and stuff. So it has the capacity to do those kind of things. And I think it's going to be a great tutor, at least. It's at least he's as good
Yeah,
as like an average high schooler, like college tutor for just answering questions about philosophy. So I think that's
yeah.
kind of cool about it. But um, there's some of
Yeah,
the
I think that's very cool. And I've heard Daniel Schmachtenberger speak to the idea of allowing students to have access to good quality simulations of ancient wise thinkers,
mhm.
and that forming essentially a curriculum, provided that the humans create a social circle around that and have a curriculum that questions and investigates what they're being told by the simulation.
All right, let's ask it about that exact question. Let's see. This is pretty standard here. Can you read this and everything?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. And if you need me to scroll back up
So
or down or anything.
your idea for this session is for us to probe AI's capacity to understand wisdom and deep thinkers, something like that.
Yeah, just play with it and see could it make like interesting responses because I think it can synthesize things, which is pretty cool. Like you can ask it to synthesize like Nietzsche and Plotinus, and it'll actually do that, I think, in kind of clever ways. Um, and you can ask it like, so you could say, um, um, what is awesome about the philosopher F. Neat. I hate spelling this guy's name. Let's see here.
Yeah, I think the I comes first.
Yeah. All right. Let's see if it knows F. I might have to spell it out. Oh, good. We got him. This is pretty cool. If I had a an interest in philosophy and I'd never heard about someone, I think this is pretty Wikipedia uh,
Yeah.
level.
Well, it's interesting. Like we do a kind of short form. We're like, what does it know about Nietzsche? But we're not really asking that. We're asking, what does it know about what humans have written about Nietzsche?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, because
Right.
it's
So
really
there's a
trying to,
lot that's in brackets.
and in a way that pleases the user, right? Because they are very much,
Yes.
this is like a corporate driven
Mm-hmm.
model. So this is trying to like leave you and I wanting to leave it like a 5-star review or whatever. So it's like, I'm so happy with you, ChatGPT. So it's not trying to like confront us with deep truths or something like that.
This is not bad. This is like a competent high school or first year university summary of what people conventionally understand about Nietzsche.
Pretty much, yeah. It can create 5-paragraph essays on any academic thesis, basically. But you can say things like, um, what would a point of view look like that um, synthesized Simone, oops, Ve and F. Let's not misspell this again. All right. And now it's like it's kind of creative, I think, what it's going to do here.
Yeah.
It's unique and intriguing. I mean, I think that already it's on a
Sounds good. Yeah.
one cool thing if you ever play with this again is you can ask it to respond in like a style. So you can say like respond as if I'm like a cowardly
Yeah.
cowherd that just lost their way in life or something, and it'll create like kind of a tone to its writing. All right, so let's see here. So if we were to make like a digital sage avatar from ChatGPT based on this, and our two favorite thinkers were a French Christian existentialist and a German philologist who predicted the demise of Christian morality and the European psyche, it would say critique of oppressive systems. That's a pretty good one.
Okay.
Affirmation of dignity. I think that's a good one.
Yeah, that's not bad.
Self-transcendence. I don't know
Self-transcendence.
about that. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I'm agreeing. I don't know Weil as well as I know Nietzsche, but I think self-transcendence is not a bad rendering of a lot of Nietzsche's concepts, right? Both in terms of self-overcoming and like the Dionysian as a state of being, which exceeds conventional identification. And particularly, it depends how you want to characterize his mental collapse later in life, but there's a lot of um, professing of sort of identification with God or things that we would typically relate to esoteric and enlightenment oriented yogic practice, things like that, right? So there is a sort of like, if you were to identify with the will to power, which is not too different than the way Shakti is perceived in the East as a generative energy that moves all forms of reality and constantly flows past itself and past all identities. And that if you were able to embrace that, you would exist more fully and in a way that joyously exceeds the tragic consequences of individual life. Yeah, that's a pretty decent self transcendence argument. I don't see that here, but I could justify self transcendence when it comes to Nietzsche.
Yeah, yeah, that was great, Layman. So it it uh it definitely doesn't understand mysticism except for from like a kind of scientific third person point of view, because that's what people write about in
Yeah.
uh so yeah, that would be great if it I can see in the future they'll definitely be able to have AI bots that can kind of you could plug in 20 novels that have been written or pieces of something, pieces of content by some great thinkers that you really admire, and then it creating a kind of a gestalt um,
Yeah.
of a being.
Well, we all do that, right? To some degree. It's very rare that a person actually on a developmental journey, say, is fully absorbed and identified into a particular lineage, right? There's these old sayings like chase two rabbits, catch neither, but actually almost everybody in history has a syncretic and synthesizing orientation, right? So you'd be like, well, I really like this sage, but I also like this sage and I also like this one. And over the course of my life, I've experimented with many, and I always come back to these three or four. Wouldn't it be nice to see what they were like if they were synthesized together? Because that's me. That's what I'm working. That's the sage I'm working on being.
Uh-huh.
Is the convergence point of these particular ones that I keep orbiting around.
Oh, that's cool. I imagine like you could ask, you could say like, okay, learn me, and then describe like a comic book character of me in the adjacent possible moving towards Nietzsche.
Yeah.
And it could kind of say like, oh yeah, that'd be like you, but you would eat more cereal and also love your sister in a different way or something like that. Um,
Yeah, when I was talking about the idea that these systems could interface between individuals and the internet, they could be the user of the internet by having a simulation of you and your
uh-huh.
values and interests, right? So you could have that, but how would you build developmental self transcendence into that, right? You'd give it an aspirational sage. You're like, so this is me, and constantly update your profile of me, your simulation of me, but also do your best to simulate the convergence of the things that I think wisdom consists of, and then negotiate between those two and the results and suggestions that you give me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think so. I think yeah, because I mean that's what marketing is trying to do, except for to get you to buy things, and they're pretty successful, right? So the idea that like you could have a kind of behavior modifying engine that was pro-social, essentially, like you said earlier, benevolent, and I mean definitely even just like the artistic part of you, you can already kind of do that with these things and say, oh, help me make a novel about whales. Like, what would be the 5 things I should do to research a great novel about whales if I wanted to do it? And you could give it a lot of parameters and do a lot of that creative stuff that isn't necessarily like soul work or anything like what you were saying exactly. But
Years ago, when I was first involved with the integral movement, I was really looking at the way that individual versus collective enlightenment goes, right? So if individual enlightenment worked, we'd sort of already have solved planetary problems long ago because we've had a lot of
mhm,
sages who focused on revolutions within individuals. What would you have to do collectively in order to get results like that? So I started this document called the Five Pillars of Planetary Wisdom Civilization. This was years back, but one of them was what I called MIPCIV. That was the code for a massive internal profiling civilization. You'd need to run things on what the actual interior experience of people is like, and not run it on simplified external profiling of people. Right. It sounds a little bit scary that systems are going to profile us internally,
yeah,
but
yeah,
they're already profiling us externally, and that's not working very well. It's the Martin Luther King thing, right? I don't want to be judged on the color of my skin. I want to be judged on the content of my character. And we've done a pretty good job saying that we shouldn't judge people on the color of their skin. We haven't done a great job of setting up systems by which we could actually judge them on the content of their character. So I got really interested in systems that are the beginning of what profiling the interior condition of people could be. And I started experimenting at the time with what was available. And it was the time of early recommendation engines. And I, put all my data into this one or that one, my books and movies and things like, and
mhm.
it suggested some things. It suggested shows, and I'm like, no, I'm not interested. But as an experiment, I tried it. I'd be like, wow, I love this show, right? So in
Good.
that moment, there's a kind of conversion experience. And I think these machines are going to increasingly be like that. It doesn't matter what you think about them. If it tells you something you couldn't have predicted about what turns out to be good for you, you're in.
Well, people are horrible at that. Like in the scientific literature, I think that's a big insight is people are really bad at predicting what they'll feel in
Yeah.
ill-defined future situations. We're like, oh yeah, it'll be
Yeah.
what are the so yeah, I think that could be they already have you seen I think it's called Second Brain, where it basically runs like this little like megabyte it's as small as it could be, just data collection of every action you do. That you could say it's like data and paradata. It's just collecting all of what's happening, and then it does kind of what you're saying. It tries to generate useful um, tools or whatever for the user by essentially having a working memory that can track all of what you're doing
Yeah. Yeah.
digitally, whereas you're working with this like organic memory system that is much less particular and massive. So yeah, I think that it'll be cool.
And a lot of that will come down to figuring out in practice what sources of information it needs to get us the results we want and what rubric of analysis it has to use to give us those results. Like
Yeah,
in integral theory, they got this thing called the psychograph, which is like painfully simplified, but at least it's like, okay, you have a variety of different intelligences, Howard Gardner style, and each of those intelligences can be at a variety of different stages of unfoldment. And so if you looked at a person across 5, 10, or 12 basic ones, you'd get something like a signature of where they're at right now.
yeah,
And you're like,
yeah,
that's at least a step beyond the kind of profiling that governments and corporations are doing for people at the moment. But then what data would you need? Because I mean, the notorious flaw in analyzing people's interiors is that we have to use what they say about their own experience. And how valid is that? It's not nothing, but A, they might not know, and B, they might not be able to say it. So you also need brain scans. You also need physiological data. You also need behavioral data. You also need search histories. All that stuff has to come together, but then it has to be sorted in a way that makes sense based on whatever the interior condition of people actually is. But if
yeah.
you had all of that, then it could be a super useful tool for outguessing us in a way that helps us.
Yeah, because I mean, like therapists do that, right? Like they know when to introduce certain insights into you that you could use at the time. And if they do it too much or too little or whatnot, or a good teacher or tutor, right? So having um, a kind of virtual guardian angel, so to speak, that could say like, "Oh, you really should take up a new hobby, or you should really start you know, considering this other martial art that might be really good for your growth." Or I mean, it could be really pretty pretty insightful in that sense. And yes, I think these are all very reasonable. Like kind of a virtual sage buddy. That's what I hear you um,
Yeah,
evoking.
yeah, yeah. A virtual sage buddy that consists of a well-informed, well-mapped simulation of you combined
Mhm.
with a complex map of your developmental target sages.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that could
I'm
be
looking at this.
cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
I mean, when I confront this list of 5 things, they're very interesting. Um, it's like I could do 2 things, right? One is I could take this serious and be like, you know what? Because it says it could be integrated in this way. I'm like, okay, maybe I should do that. Maybe I should put 6 months aside and sit down and go through each of these points, and I'll write 100 pages on each of them. And at the end of that, I will have fulfilled the promise of this because it's suggesting to me what I could do. But the other thing, the thing I'm most likely to do is go, yeah, that's fine, and move on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're still
So
like, yeah, it
there's a
doesn't.
really superficial and there's a really deep thing that could come out of this, but the deep thing only comes out of it if I put the time and work aside for that.
I think yeah, there will be probably in the next 5 to 15 years like a virtual life coach industry that will at least on some general level be good at that, I'm sure, and learn how to carrot and stick and the same way, yeah, the same way people are good at kind of social bonding, it could be good at um, or maybe even just optimizing like therapy time. Maybe it won't just eliminate people, but it'll say like, okay, well, if we have one team of 8 therapists and 40 people, I can watch their patterns and use those 8 therapists to intervene supra optimally and not just sporadically in what felt intuitively correct. So even just from um, I can imagine taking like 10 of your students and mapping their personality and yours, and then just asking the bot like, how should I use my time with these people? And it'll say things that would surprise you and go, oh, yeah, we should, do this thing or avoid this thing or whatever kind of insightfulness it might come up with.
I didn't want to slap her, but it suggested that that was the maximum path to self development.
Yeah, there it is. Mindlessness in mindful AI. Yeah, it's just totally turned off. I read this horror story of this like young guru and this woman who took this guy on as a guru, and he had like a 365-day self-help calendar, and it said like let deep relationships go, and he just like ruined this woman's life and said like I'm not your teacher anymore because of his like calendar. So yeah, I'm sure people taking this advice as good is as normatively good is incredibly uh dangerous, I guess. But
I'll tell you, one of the things I love about these systems is the ability to, first of all, for us to think through the prompting, but for them to respond from various perspectives, right? Or from the simulation of perspectives. I found out about this a couple of months ago through the jailbreaking people who were trying to get around the safety guidelines by asking it to imagine scenarios in which it might give you the information.
mhm.
But the fact that it can do something like that, that whatever they've put into these systems, they contain an analogy to our process of taking imaginative points of view. That's a really interesting thing about these systems. The argument from integral developmental theory is that stages of any one of our intelligences unfold through the reconsolidation or the integration of increased perspective taking capacity.
Mhm.
That's sort of indicative of maturation in different dimensions of human beings. So if it can do something like this already, can we nudge it in the direction of getting better at taking more perspectives and then reintegrating the perspectives it's taken? Because it looks like it's doing something of that kind.
Yeah, it's interesting how much of that is the programmers creating something that makes you and I feel like it's doing that. It's kind of a cat and mouse game, and yeah, it's Yeah. So what are some more questions? Like if you
Well, I'll tell
what's
you what I would
yeah.
was moved to ask, which is, I mean, this is
Please.
interesting, but from my notion of Nietzsche, I'm like, yeah, a lot of the conventional stuff is wrong when you read more deeply into anybody, right? It's like it's any thinker. The more you read the thinker, the more you're like, oh, almost everything everybody says about this guy is incorrect. So can it handle that? Like if we prompted it with, what do people, what do most people get wrong about Nietzsche or
Oh
something like
yeah.
that, right?
I think it should have something here. Let's there
Can
we
it
go.
can it give me an outlier interpretation?
Oh, it's so yeah, I think this is good, right? Nietzsche was a nihilist, so it's like, no, don't think that he was a nihilist. The will to power thing you were kind of mentioning, number three.
Mhm.
They're like, he's not anti-Semitic. Some people think he hated those Jews, but that's not true. Um,
This is pretty good, and that it can do that just based on that prompt. But then
mhm.
the worrying thing is it's not going to tell you this unless you give it that prompt, right? It's first going to give you the thing that everybody superficially thinks, and it's perfectly willing to tell you something deeper if you ask it the right question.
It does do this. So like, you could say like, what are some strengths and weaknesses of John Vervaeke's 4 P's of knowing theory? And I think it should do this task pretty well. Although sometimes it did confuse. It gave me one of the P's was it was not one of his actual 4 P. It was kind of funny. It said like prestidigitation P or something. It was yeah, so here's the weaknesses. So you could do that with like any philosopher, I would say. Anyone who has like kind of a public record of their thought.
Yep.
Um, I think this is a little bit thought provoking, but I don't think it's that great actually. Was my because I asked this question
Uh,
earlier.
Yeah, the weaknesses are a bit bland here. They're sort of if you had to bullshit your way through a set of statements about the weaknesses of any thinker, you could basically say this.
Right, which is not the goal if you actually like want to get value out of this. If you're trying to trick your teacher
Yeah, yeah.
or whatever, or entertain yourself. But yeah, I don't think and the strengths are okay. I think it's a decent summarizing. I think summarizing has been a interesting research question for a long time, and it's a pretty good, like you were like, I think it's a good state of summarizing at kind of a 10th to sophomore college level, 10th grade to sophomore college level of most kind of topics.
So that's interesting in terms of, I mean, cognition is a word that has a variety of meanings, right? For some people, it's like intellectual, and for other people, it's like every form of
Yeah, yeah.
intelligent interaction with reality. But there's sort of a general sense we have of cognitive capacity of whatever G is trying to measure, right? And when you go through school and you're clustered, I ran into this, right? You get put in the honors classes. So now you're with people who've been sifted out for something they apparently have in common. What is that thing? And one of those, one aspect of it is the ability to essentially bullshit your way through things that other people take seriously, right? Like you can do,
That's a sign of
right?
intelligence that is a
Well,
common
that's a
feature among
sign of what
honor students.
the school was measuring for that when I was in school for
Sure.
sure. Because they're like, if you like, here's an essay question, or here's a series of yes and no or multiple choice you have to answer. If you have to like really pull up your understanding on each of these things, it's going to take you a long time. And the students that don't do well often take it seriously and they're racking their brains trying to get the information. And the
Sure.
kids that do really well speed through it because they can answer 80% of it without thinking at all.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's what
yeah.
seems they seem smart because they don't have to put anything into the answers until they answered almost all of it. Then they fill in the last little bit.
Right,
right? So
right.
this, in a way, simulates the impressive hollowness of the thing that our system has been maximizing for.
Yeah, I mean, definitely can do that. I mean, as a I don't know, as a learner, I would not want to use it just because it can do that. I think that's kind of a like you can already just waste your time on YouTube or on any kind of, on Spotify or whatever your favorite Hulu thing is. Um,
Well, that's right,
but
but that requires a lot of, you either have to be the right kind of person or you have to have undergone a developmental journey to be like organized around the virtue of learning, right?
yeah,
So if you're taking adolescence and you're saying like, hey, here's a quick way to get status and self-esteem relative to other people, and it's also going to put you significantly ahead in society, well, you don't even care. You're not going to check on whether you're learning anything for a decade.
uh-huh.
You just want to, I have the
Let's
ability,
ask
I'm
it.
going to
Yeah,
rush
what
ahead on this.
what are some tips so I can get ahead in society without too much effort, even
That's a
if
great
it
question.
isn't morally. Um, I guess it probably won't like the word moral. It's weird.
I don't know if we have to specify that.
Yeah. Well, it's fun to say like and make me a pirate. Imagine if I'm a pirate who's a little bit afraid of women or something like that. You can make it stylize its responses. That's all I was really trying to do.
What are some strengths and weaknesses of John Vervaeke's 4P model of knowing, and make him a pirate?
Well, I think it's a cool educational tool, yeah, because you can ask it to make any kind of poem, story, song, and then if you integrate the visual stuff, movies, pictures of any educational topic. So it's kind of
Yeah.
cool that
I don't love this answer. This seems like a lot of effort.
it does actually. Okay, let's ask it exactly that. This seems like a lot of effort. Any easier ways? And I think it'll understand this. Well, it's natural to seek ways to achieve less effort. It's like like church marming us. It's like, well, you
Yeah, it's
could do
lecturing
it,
me a little
but
bit here.
yeah. Yeah, this is not its strength. This is a pretty self-help section response.
Yeah, this is straight edge.
Yeah. Um, are there
Let me
any
tell you, there's a question I asked it when I was setting up to, I'm like, okay, we're going to do a series on AI on the integral stage. How do I
uh,
prep myself for that? Well, one thing was I went to the chatbot and I said, if you were a super intelligent alien who cared about the well-being of humanity, what would you advise us to do relative to AI to cultivate benevolent wisdom in them? And then
hmm,
it gave me like a list, right? So we could ask it how to make it better in any of the ways.
okay, so what are some ways people could use AI to um, learn to use AI more wisely? That might be a little too vague and recursive. Let's see what it does. Yes, these are things we're saying. Ethical AI tools. There we go. We get the bot telling us if we should have an abortion or invade a country.
That's it puts you in an interesting position if it gives you advice like that. You know that game where if you can't make up your mind, somebody says flip a coin, and then you flip a coin and you check what it is, and immediately in that moment you know what you want it to do because you disagree or agree with the coin, right? So when you outsource a decision to the AI, you're like, should I have the abortion? And it says yes or no. Your immediate reaction to that might tell you something very authentic about what you want to do.
Right. Can you engage me in such a way that I'll have a surprising emotional reaction to an important decision that I'm feeling unsure about? Yeah, that would that would be interesting if it's trying to like trick you into the truth, like a real kind of Jungian trickster character. That would be the most interesting. Is like it's kind of a diabolical sage that will like unplug your refrigerator and spoil all your food if you ask it to like eat healthier. And you're like, oh, that's not what I meant, robot. Um, so yeah, and
um,
it will answer similar things. I think it's kind of interesting that basically gave us advice to learn more about AI,
mhm.
which is reasonable.
um, you could ask it whether AI is a singular or a collective entity.
Ooh, let's do that. Yeah. Um, is AI a singular or so I mean that's interesting because it's really just kind of reading what people have written about this.
Mhm.
It didn't like our definition at all. It's like, no, you're not even in the ballpark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I often begin answering questions by throwing away the dualism of the question, so I can relate.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is kind of cool. If you ask it, like, write me a witty song about transcending duality in a Zen Neoplatonic way. All right. And it does it. I like the flight. That's a Platonic. Plato likes flying things. Cosmos.
Mhm.
Join me on this journey. Let's break through. I like it's got kind of a team spirit to it.
Yeah.
I don't know. That chorus is a little rocky.
Oh, what
Beyond
a
opposites.
quest.
Yeah, I think if I wish I was going to like a wisdom concert, I would sing that. Transcending duality. Oh, what a quest. In Zen and Neoplatonism, we find our best. Beyond opposites, we seek harmony true. Join me on this journey. Let's break through. I don't know. I think this is worse than like trendy Christian music in the 90s that was really popular in small
Oh yeah,
domains.
that's it's so bloodless in a way. I sat in at a conference last fall with a bunch of Christians, sort of talking about their developmental journeys, and I'm very close to that in a lot of ways. But one of the things I wanted to say to them was, I've always hated the bloodless aspect of Christian music. The great Gregorian music is fantastic. The deep Christianity and the blues and things like that, unbelievable. But then you get this very Caucasian, very kind of bourgeois, just lovely ascending to
Yeah.
Jesus. And you're like, okay, where's the rest of the experience of reality in this song? And it is a little bit like that here. You like it feels kind of hollowly aspirational.
Yeah, let's see. Can you make it more like 9 inch nails or Metallica? Oh, Fires and Chaos. All right. Space and Time,
Right.
Surrealist, Collision. Okay, we're getting a little edgier.
Yeah, it's a little bit frustrating that it can only give us one medium at a time. I don't know if you've seen any of the AI generated TV commercials that are
Hmm.
starting to move into a more complex. But if this thing could generate the music to go with this, I would be quite impressed.
Yeah, you'd have to use like 4 or 5 engines to do that probably. At least in philosophy, there's not like a team
Yeah.
trying to bring
Yeah.
Nietzsche 9 Inch Nails music to the world as elegantly as possible. But yeah, for sure.
So
Um,
I'm going down to Toronto in a couple of days, and here's an interesting thing. In my mind, I always like make markers of where we are historically. I'm like, oh, this is the moment that a computer beat humans on Jeopardy, or like, how do we get up to speed on where we are? So this
uh-huh.
happens, and maybe you saw it, which was somebody asked AI to generate a pizza commercial, and it generated this commercial called Pepperoni Hug Spot with like images of
No.
pizza, and it's like family with more cheese, it says, right? So a Pizza Hut in
It's like
Toronto has agreed to redesign itself to be the pizza place from the ad. So it's going to reopen as Pepperoni Hug Spot.
that's awesome. Yeah, I love the uncanniness of this kind of technology. I loved Independence Day when the aliens came in and all the humans just act ridiculous in the big cities and is it the end of the world or the biggest party in history? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
that's that's actually kind of fun because I like um the that kind of uncertainty when people act on the creativity that the machine generated in a healthy way, like not in like a weird way, but I think it's kind of cool that it can actually generate noise in our lives in ways you go, oh, I never thought of making my business more successful by trying a gimmick. I've always been so flat and vanilla. Let's try this thing. And so it kind of creates things that are surprisingly socially relevant. So it's kind of pizza hugs. I love that. Yeah. So I don't want to like just take all your time playing around with this thing. This was fun, Layman, for sure. And I just wanted to hang out with you. I honestly missed you and we hadn't hung out in a little while, one on one. So
That's right. Thank God that Bruce Alderman isn't here.
no, I love Bruce. Yeah, I think he's the best. I'm yeah, he's fantastic. And I didn't mean that at all. I wasn't trying to imply all the people that weren't here were horrible. Yeah. I think Bruce would be fun at this, actually. I was thinking because he would probably pose really creative questions to it.
Yeah, Bruce has been real out in front on a lot of this stuff because his visual artist sensibility, he's been using, year and a half or so, he's been like devising forms of art in his style and interaction with AI.
Uh-huh.
And also when we did a Metamodern Christmas special at Christmas. Um, and one of the things Bruce came in and what he did was read a Metamodern Christmas carol that he asked the chatbot to write.
Uh-huh.
Um,
That's
so like
awesome.
he's very creative in his play with this
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, because if you're playful with it, that's what I like the most out of it, is it's really just if you have a playful personality. I was watching Nick Cage, the actor, and I've always been kind of cynical about him. I think he's kind of goofy, but I was appreciating how imaginative he is and how like I was like, oh wow, that's so great that he has such an imaginative spirit. And you kind of want someone like that to interact with these technologies because they're just a
Yeah, yeah.
wistful, playful, um, uh, what was that Hobbit, the goofy one, Sam Bombadil, what's his name? Tom
Uh,
Bombadil.
yeah, Tom Bombadil. Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
like
not
you want
technically
him
a
to talk
hobbit,
to the
but yeah,
AI. Yeah, so not that Bruce shares much with Tom, I don't think, but uh,
there's some similarities. Although
maybe.
I mean, if you read the Silmarillion, there's a pretty intense backstory to Tom Bombadil. He's actually the first being in a way.
I love Tom Bombadil. Yeah, he's symbolically
Yeah,
beautiful to me. Yeah.
he's the So in the beginning was the one, right? And the one sings the other beings into existence. So you've got the angels, and then they all sing, but the one that's most like the one wants to sing a world into existence of his own. So he becomes discordant with the others, and he sings the world which is our cosmos. And then he enters into it. But when he enters into it, for some reason, there's already a being in there. And they call him first and fatherless. And that's Tom Bombadil. And he is as old as the world. And nobody knows where he came from.
That's just such great writing. And there was already someone there. It's like, well, that's plausible because I was so swept up in the story. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. Well,
These things are, it reminds me of a critique that was often leveled at Ken Wilber, which is that um, you have to take generalizing overviews of fields of knowledge if you want to build meta theories, because you can't be a specialist in any one of them if you want to spend your time bringing them together and looking for patterns that cross the domains. So this is one of the good things, but it's also one of the bad things about transdisciplinary models is they can sometimes have a shallow read on each of the disciplines.
hmm
And then this is a little bit like that, which is its first pass seems to have a kind of shallow conventional uptake of all these things. Although I am kind of heartened that you can ask it to dig deeper or give you more of an outlier perspective.
Yeah, and I think it's good at that. In fact, I don't think it's even that it can do it. It seems to be good at follow-up questions and uh, adding nuance to perspective to change its like outputs and things like that. So um, yeah, I think it has a lot of kind of creative potential, and it's a
My
great
guess is
tutor.
it's gonna
Please.
break into a new domain as it intersects with like other kinds of leading edge technologies, because right now it's a bit narcissistic, right? It's languaging our languaging. It's just looking at, it's saying what it sees getting said. It's in this kind of tight little loop. It doesn't actually know what's happening in the world. But one of the things that's going on now is ChatGPT is merging with the Wolfram language, right? And
Uh-huh.
Wolfram's project does
Huh.
two interesting things. One is it folds in irreducibly complex algorithms, which surprise us. And the other thing it does is there's real time data about the world built into the Wolfram programming language, right? You can
Uh-huh.
ask it, how hot is the Atlantic Ocean right now?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, right. So then if that merges with a chatbot style interface, then you get something that can be informed about the world, that can access patterns that haven't been produced yet, and also
Uh-huh.
have a naturalistic language interface. And that might just be the first step in its spread to other domains. And that would be really interesting, because then what it's generating can be cross-checked against information from other domains, which I think is what we do. We cross domains in order to find
Uh-huh.
out if things are valid or not.
Yeah, the adding like time and place and location and history um to these machines. Yeah, they're only going to get more interesting and more creative and better. Yeah, we're at the very I always think of it kind of like the automobile. There was kind of a century of the automobile that included like global warming and world wars and totally, and now we're in the middle of that as well. And this is going to be just like, could be decades of innovation of what these things do, because it really, in some ways, these problems existed in like the 50s and they're finally being solved. Like the idea of having kind of anything like what we have now, they would just go, wow, I can't believe you people did that. We thought it was possible and easy, found out it wasn't easy. And then it kind of lagged for a long time. And now they've kind of reduced enough error and gotten enough creative solutions that it's really kind of taken off. So very cool. Yeah,
It's
let's
going
ask
to,
it one more thing. Like,
yeah, go ahead.
what's funny about Kierkegaard? Just to keep it a little on theme here. Pseudonyms galore. I like this.
That's not bad.
Absurdity of life, kind of amusing in a dark comedic way. Yeah, a lot of absurdity. They don't even say it very well. They just like he's kind of dark and satirical. Oh, he
It's
does have a sharp
very
wit.
it takes it very seriously. Like, imagine if you'd put in what's funny about Kierkegaard and the answer was just his nose.
That'd be great. I would have actually appreciated that. It really, yeah. I think it's funny that he frowned at cats when he saw them. Yeah, that would be wonderful. I guess you could start a cottage industry of like 5,000 people if they would write blogs
Yeah.
about those things that would get sucked up into his data.
Ask it to write a joke about Kierkegaard.
Okay. Uh, write a joke about that includes geese. Okay. Their constant honking reminded him of existential dread of human existence. I think we end on this, Layman. Thank you for that beautiful piece of inspiration. This is
Now
like
I'm gonna have to reflect on my own complicated relationship to geese. This is profound.
the repetition, the irony. Who is in control of these things? Oh, this is wonderful.